So welcome everybody to Tension in the Rope. This is part 2. As we realize this is quite a big subject, Midori has so much wonderful wisdom to share. We're going to be sharing about sex, culture, and the history in Japan, as well as focusing in this segment on Midori's adventures in kink clubs in Japan with some more personal stories this time. So you guys get an inside view. My name is Caroline Carrington. I am a Neo-Tantra educator and a kinkster. I coach people in kink, in polyamory, and all kinds of alternative expressions of sexuality. I am a dear friend of Midori's, and she for a few years now has been talking to me about kind of behind the scenes about some of her frustrations and the way Westerners can show up in the rope world. And I invited her to come on and speak with all of us so that we can get an insider's perspective and really learn from someone who I think is the most intelligent voice in the kink community. I kind of say that a lot, but it's really true for me, Midori. You always keep me on my toes, even our late night, midnight conversations. But I'm thrilled that you agreed to be back for more and to really help those of us that want to learn how to do this better and how to show up in a way that's appreciative and respectful of this incredible art versus appropriating. So welcome, Midori, and thank you so much for being willing to share.
And I'm really glad we can do this. And hi all who's live and joining us in the moment. And hi all who's going to be viewing this later. And for those of you who are viewing this later, you are missing out on the pre and post conversation. So engage FOMO just right now. Go ahead, have your FOMO, all of it. If you have not checked out part 1, we'll recommend that you do that because we're going to be covering different materials and there's going to be overlap. And today will probably be a little more conversational. Now, I wanted to talk about the title. Did you notice the placement of the comma in the title?
Are you asking me or the other? You remove the commas though this time in the mic.
Oh, no, it's an intentional. Instead of sex, comma, culture, comma.
Ah.
It's sex culture in Japan.
Thank you. I didn't notice it like that.
So the comma placement actually was intentional.
Of course it was, Midori.
I want to focus on the sex cultures and contemporary strategies of contemporary Japanese folks in Japan, because there are Japanese folks everywhere, but the sexual strategies of contemporary Japanese people in Japan. Okay? And now that sounds all serious. However, what I actually mean is I want to tell you stories about me sleazing about in the red light districts and going to these fetish events and bondage clubs and swinger bars and kinky bars, as well as hanging out with queerdos and weirdos and hanging out with ordinary not queerdos and talking about their sex lives. So it's stories from and my insights from these adventure, or let us say research. Actually, they are research because I am extremely fascinated with my country of origin and the strategies that are deployed. Little background for those of you who don't know. I'm born in Kyoto and raised in Tokyo, until the age of 14, when I chose to leave. And I was raised in a rather old and working class neighborhood with connections to older cultures. My mother is a literature professor and very connected to older Japan. and she's still with us in Japan, but I was supposed to go visit her a couple times this year, and this COVID thing happened. So I suppose, well, this doesn't make up for going home. But every time I go home to visit my mom, I also spend a lot of time exploring the sexual subcultures and the sex related aspects of Japan, which is to say that every yen I spend on a beer in a sleazy bar is a tax write-off because it's a business expense, because there's a cover charge. So I'm going to be sharing stories from that. And yeah, so there's my opening gambit. I still go back, obviously not this year. When I do go, I always try to hang out. Now, here's the thing: because I am a native Japanese speaker, and because I am now, when I go back, I'm seen as a kikokujin, in other words, a returning person, but living in the U.S. So I straddle this unique position of simultaneously being an insider and an outsider. And because of my racial, ethnic, cultural, citizenship status, as well as my linguistic background, that there are times when I am allowed the privilege of Japaneseness and have access to that which is not shared with outsiders. And then there are times when I can also code switch right into being American, and thereby giving liberty for me to break social norms. So I actually code switch and culture switch very intentionally in order that I may go down the rabbit hole. And in Japan, it's so much about introductions and who you know and what category you are placed in based on the context. I mean, it's true anywhere there are humans, but it is extremely codified in Japan around that. So I have taken advantage of my unique status, and also my gender as being cis female has allowed me more vulnerable conversations with people that might not share with visiting non-Japanese people.
And Midori, do you speak fluent Japanese still?
It's rusty, but the way that I think about it, 2 days and 2 beers, and it's back.
Isn't it amazing how alcohol improves one's,
yeah, especially
I would say in my case, second language, but the other languages we speak.
Yeah.
We stop worrying in our heads so much, right?
On the way back to Japan, when I'm on the airplane, I can feel a little bit of anxiety coming up or nervousness coming up, because I'm very aware that I speak a smart teenager's version of Japanese, right? Because that's when I left. And I was certainly precocious, but there's the Japanese in me starts to come up and going, oh, it's not perfect. I'll be rude. So all of this like culturally ingrained shame, the shadow side of my Japaneseness starts to come up. And then I square my shoulder into my Americanness and say, God damn it. And then somewhere in there, I step into my international place where I am a transnational being and a transcultural being. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm a 21st century person, and I'm a 21st century Japanese with a heart of Edo and the heart of the Showa era, and a physical embodiment of the 21st century Japaneseness. And I have to have this internal pep talk to get myself over. And then I land and I make it through the godforsaken Narita airport. And then I get over my jet lag. I have like 2 days, and let's just say more than 2 beers. And then I get over myself. But it's really interesting to notice the cultural training of I should be ashamed of my language skills. And then it's like I have two linguistic brains. I have my American English brain and personhood, and my Japanese brain and my Japanese personhood. And to integrate that is, to consciously integrate that, to make the most of it, is actually a really interesting effort.
And do you notice that the culture, that's a big word, but is changing over time as you go back? Because do you go back once a year or once every 5 years? It depends.
About once a year. I'd like to go twice a year, but you know, it's a little expensive.
You travel a lot for your work as well.
I do travel a lot. Now, yeah, that's when it also helps when I'm getting to, you know, privately tour guide in Japan. But culture changes. Culture is change. Change in culture is the law. There is no culture that is static, right? So yeah, it is changing, and it is changing rapidly and amazingly, and it is simultaneously exciting and heartbreaking. But I'm betting that the listeners want to get to the dirty, juicy stories about the bars and the bondage spaces. And I also want to talk about how people in Japan end up learning their kink, because it's radically different than here. So can we go on that?
Please. We're getting yes and cheers in the chat.
So here is a common email query I would get, right? From, hi, you know, my name is so-and-so, and I'm an American, and I don't speak Japanese, and I'm going over to Japan to visit, and how do I find the local kink community and the BDSM scene? And how do I drop into it? And then, oh, I mean, that email is so hard for me to answer. So first I ask, are you ethnically Japanese, right? And it actually matters. It actually matters profoundly, because to be completely blunt, because for those of you who know me, I am just that. Japan is a very racist culture. It is very racist and very gendered as well as misogynistic, right? It is, Japanese people assume that it is a monoracial, monoethnic culture. It's not, but the minority numbers are very small. Okay? And so functionally, it is a monolinguistic, monoethnic, monocultural, where cultural diversity is not really known, not in the sense that we talk about it. So it is so profoundly racist that they don't know they're racist. So if somebody is not ethnically Japanese, and then I will ask, do you speak Japanese at all? And most people don't. So if you're not ethnically Japanese, or Japanese passing in appearance, right? And if you don't speak Japanese, you're going to have a hard time finding places. Now, there's this assumption that oftentimes comes with these emails that there are kink communities and subcultures in the way that we have it in North America and Europe, but particularly in North America, that the assumption is that there are BDSM munchas, and that people who are private individuals who are interested in kink get together and self-organize. This is not the case in Japan. Did we talk about the entertainment district in Edo period Japan in part 1?
Yes, we spoke a little to that, yeah.
I talk about so much of this that I forget when I talked about it. So in Japan, there's historically been a government-sanctioned entertainment quarter system that has existed since the Edo period. this is an important fact, because this means that where there is an interest or a want of recreation and entertainment, there's a mercantile solution to provide for this entertainment, okay? Which leads through the fall of the Tokugawa government, the Meiji Restoration, World War I, kicked Russian ass, then World War II, they were going, World War II, happened, that happened, Japan falls into like an economic disaster, but then entertainment life comes roaring back to entertain the GIs. And then in the 1960s, as the Japanese economy starts to rise, 1970s starts to rise, the middle class and the businessmen, what do they want? They want entertainment. What in the hell does this have to do with BDSM? Well, that's some of the things, a minority of a larger scope of entertainment that the newly moneyed bourgeoisie or the middle class seek. In the meantime, why not individual kinksters organizing for kink clubs? That requires an individual to take their pleasure and go public. That is a profound outing that just doesn't happen. Why should you come and out yourself as somebody who's interested in BDSM when there's already institutionalized bars and entertainment quarters that where there is a need, there'll be a bar. And if it's through a bar or a club or a mercantile establishment, so there's a mercantile solution for moneyed recreation, okay? The idea of also, the idea of individual as a center point of empowerment and existence is a Eurocentric concept. If we look at the Enlightenment, I mean, and whereas in Japan, the good of the greater over the good of the one. And in the US, it is good of the one at the cost of fuck all everyone else. And
yep, we've had a good lesson in that in the last 9 months in this country.
Right. So also there's a profound social cost to being seen as a nail that sticks out in Japan. And to put one's own pleasure ahead of one's own social role and performance causes a lot of ripples and causes a lot of problems. And the risk to an individual, and I mean risk in terms of like, hey, I won't fit in, right? Now let's go back to the US, where, so consider the Eulenspiegel Society, TESS, and Society of Janus, as well as the Hellfire Club in Chicago. Okay, but the Eulenspiegel Society is a good example. That's one of the oldest and longest running kink organization, BDSM organization. It started by a gentleman posting an ad in the Village Voice to meet like-minded people in the basement of a church, I believe, if I remember correctly. And the Society of Janus was started by Cynthia Slater, who was a professional dominant, now we would call her queer, and a cantankerous activist in San Francisco who formed an educational social organization. To form educational social organizations requires individuals who are willing to say, this is who I am. It also requires that there not be other framework. So there are leather bars, certainly. So for gay men, you could have the leather bar, and which was also a very codified thing. And you have, you know, very closeted, and hanky codes developed out of that and all sorts of stuff. Go look up Dr. Gail Rubin, that's a reference, Dr. Gail Rubin's study on that. History of leather bars, especially in San Francisco area. I think she also covers Chicago too. So also the American characteristics, I like to compare this to the difference in the BDSM cultures in North America versus Japan as the barn raising versus the mafia bar. All right. We were talking about gay leather bars. Now, historically, gay leather bars in the US were owned by whom? Caroline, do you know?
I don't know.
Italian mafia, especially in New York.
Ah.
Why is that important? Because who would rent a space to
kinky folks?
No, not the kinky folks, gay men.
Ah.
Specifically gay men, when being gay was and loving the same gender, especially men, considered, well, it was a crime. And yeah, it was a crime, and the social cost and the legal cost was profound, not to mention you could be institutionalized, arrested, you know, beaten up, murdered, and all of that. If you are marginalized individuals and you want to gather and you want to have a business, who's going to rent to you? Think about that. So
well, I love thinking of the mafia as progressive.
No, they're not progressive at all.
Oh.
Probably just as likely beat up a gay man in a back alley. It has nothing to do with being progressive.
Is it just about money? Yeah, cold hard cash.
Because if you've got no place else to go, they got a space and they got rent and you pay premium. It has nothing to do with goodwill. It has all to do with the business. And behind the doors of places with names like the White Horse, the Stud, the Spike, men could gather, and some women could gather, mostly men. Likewise in Japan, entertainment would be gathered in these business establishments, many of which are mafia owned. The entertainment quarter and the people who are working there put on bondage shows in the bondage themed bars. Not all Japanese red light district bars, all sorts of sexy themes, tiny sliver. I don't know the statistics on it. That should be an interesting research. Unfortunately, with the Tokyo Olympics, the thriving and gloriously sleazy underground and the bar cultures of Japan, the mayor of Tokyo has been trying to work hard to, like, quite literally bulldoze the red light district because it's embarrassing. Except where are the international guests and athletes going to go partay? If not for the bar district and the gay quarter and the tiny little bars of Golden Guy. All right, so.
But sorry, they do have a gay quarter in Tokyo, for example?
Yeah, you know, in the way that the West Village wasn't officially a gay quarter, but that was where people hung out. Boys Town in Chicago, you know, it's not official.
Right. So it's still a little underground.
A lot.
Yes. That's what I heard from you after your last.
Yes, it's still a lot underground, but, you know, queerdos gather. Yeah. So, okay. In the West, I was talking about barn raising, and why the analogy with barn raising, or in this American, and we do come from an agrarian background, right? Well, we're going to bring up, you know, Farmer Bob's barn together. We're going to do a quilting bee. There's this whole, like, share and teach attitude, which works well in some sense and then doesn't work well in others. There are pros and cons. But this idea of gathering, now, Now add to that the civil rights and the gay rights movement and the influence of the civil rights and the gay rights movement on identity politics, and based on identity politics and who you are and who you love, which emboldened kinky people to also gather as a social movement. In Japan, there's never been a civil rights movement. And there was a...
Never, sorry, that really just shows how you can't be the one nail sticking up. It's like everybody's meant to be the same.
There's never been a civil rights movement.
Wow.
Because supposedly everybody's the same.
Except not.
Yeah.
So there's this layer of pretense, I imagine.
And if you are a mixed blood, or if you come from an untouchable caste, which there is in Japan, or if you have Korean descent. Yeah, there's never been a civil rights movement. No, this isn't South Africa. No, this isn't Selma. This is Tokyo, where everybody tries to fit in and just make it through another day. There was a little flutter of feminism in the 70s, and then it was squashed. It just deflated when the boom 80s came. And then the men folk were making big money, and then the women were back in being moms. So, okay. Let's see. Oh, somebody about the Olympics. Yes, the Olympics. My plan this year was go before the Olympics and go again afterwards, but then COVID, like, so. All right, so what does this have to do with kink bars, kink spaces, and kink education in Japan? Okay. Because kink pursuits are considered a behind the closed door recreation, or bar and commercial space recreation, as opposed to a space, as opposed to a way by which, now today in the US, especially with the benefit of the sex positive movement, which, by the way, the sex positive movement owns a great deal to the civil rights movement, as well as the gay rights movement, right? And the idea of self-actualization, which has a whole lot to do with idealistic early 20th century of albeit very white-leaning idea of self-actualization, right? In Japan, there was already a framework for getting your perv on, which were these retail establishments. Yeah, there was no need or pressure to come out if you could go in. And they weren't closets, but they were closed doors of paid establishments. And going to such places were considered the, if you had the money to go to these bars, it just was another thing that showed your affluence. Okay, so if you're curious about these things, oh, and there's gendered pricing, right? So for dudes, this price, and for women, this price.
And it's still very split in the binary, Midori, in Japan, the gender binary?
Oh, I think it's gonna be that way for quite some time. Yeah. That is not to say that trans folks aren't there. Of course they are, they're human. But yeah, it is a very binary and gender binary culture. Now, in the margins of entertainment, like in so many places, those who don't fit into the social norms find employment. Cabarets, drag bars, in Thailand, it would be ladyboys, various different commercialization and fetishization of the non-normative bodies and identities, which is, when you take a moment, just think about that. To be who you are and to live as who you are, you have to submit yourself to or accept your fetishized body. To, in some way or another, accept the objectification. And how does one not internalize that at some level? Mm-hmm. But this is, as in, and you know, we here in 2020, San Francisco, we spout a lot about sex positivity, but let's face it, people who have been different have been making a living in the margins and the shadows in the US historically and even today. So if you're a bit different, if you're deemed unemployable, if you want to live as who you are, oftentimes you end up in sex work, which also then connects to these BDSM bars. Okay, so back to the original question of the person who's like, how do I find community? Communities are not formed in Japan in the same way that it is formed in, let's say, Tokyo versus San Francisco. Let's get really specific here. San Francisco, the place that, like, yeah, you know, let's have cultural revolutions, right? Tokyo, the old seat of the Tokugawa government, that is the national capital and the business capital. So communities of human connections are formed in commercial establishments. How do people learn about kink? Well, they may be going to these bars, and the workers, I don't know how many times I've been to various kink bars, and I'll sit in the corner. I sit in the corner and I try really hard to pretend like I don't know anything.
I can see you just toying with.
But there is a bar that I'm a regular at, and it's nice. You know, I feel like Norm. I walk in, and you know, it'll be like, you know, like 6 months or a year, and they'll be like, Midori-sama, and I'm like, Norm. And you know, I sit in the corner like a creepy troll and watch what's going on. And okay, so let me paint you a picture, okay? There's one bar that I really love. It's owned by an art gallery owner. His main job is art gallery, and he also has this perv bar. So I find it interesting that it's actually not mafia owned, which is kind of cool, but because it's an art gallery owner, the place is just gorgeous, right? And so I'll be sitting in the corner with my little drink, and then they give you a little coaster, and the coaster indicates, depending on what side you have up, it'll say there's an emu, and then there's an esu, and then there's another one. And it's your roles, whether you're top, you're bottom, or you're fetishist. And so they give you a coaster, and then, you know, you put your very expensive whiskey on it, and there is a minimum. Right? And so I'm sitting in my corner like a creepy little troll, watching. And this guy came in with a girl he was trying to impress, and another guy friend, and I could tell that they were sort of like business associates. And there's beautiful sex worker staff who's like in vinyl clothing. And one of the guys like, oh, you know, what's the hot wax like? And she brings over hot wax and then pours it on, and drinking, pour. Yes, there's a lot of drinking in Japan. That goes along with kink.
That's so interesting, because here it's like not allowed.
Militantly so.
Yes.
It's also very different in London, right? In the kink and fetish subcultures and the parties, oh my God, I don't think it was like it was like 80s level of drugs going around in there. I mean, holy shit. Right? So yeah, so there's a lot of drinking, and or somebody will like, oh, you know, that whips thing, let me try it out. And so, you know, middle manager from insurance company takes his coat off, and one of the workers will give him a sexy spanking. And then once in a while, people will get up, the workers will get up and do a rope bondage show, or generally a rope bondage show. Okay. And there's this whole unspoken code of conduct. If you are a foreigner visiting Japan, you're probably not going to be able to go into all the bars, because discrimination is not illegal in Japan. They will tell you to leave.
Wow.
Yes, because if you don't know these unspoken social rules, you will make other people uncomfortable, and you will be embarrassing yourself. And because you're a foreigner, and this is how the logic goes, because you're a foreigner, well, we're not going to tell you the rules, but you don't know the rules, and you'll make everyone uncomfortable, so we're just not going to let you in. You're welcome.
This is a different way to do it, right?
Well, this is where I bust out my local dialect, because they see me and they're like, oh, American of some unidentifiable Asianness, right? I also move differently now. One moves differently, and I move differently in my Japanese brain and my American brain.
Right? Interesting.
So,
like, is it more contained when you are in Japan?
Little more, but not a lot.
I'm like, I can't quite imagine you like being repressed, Midori.
No. And in fact, a friend of mine told me that, you know, he could spot me across the Shinjuku station just by how I was walking.
Wow.
But also growing up in Japan, I'd be considered butch.
Really?
Now let's talk about butch versus femme. It's not about the accessories. There's a little of that, but it's about the social privilege that I assume. I've always taken up space. And I remember as a young woman, when I was a teenager, as well as then later on as an adult, if I'm out with a group of other women, I end up falling back and being perimeter watch. And if there was even the slightest issue with anyone, I'd be the one in their face. So because I assumed to take space, that I'd be considered more butch. Okay, so what's fun about being like a more butch with like makeup on is, oh my God, the gals just like, oh, Midori-san. And so I get like the
fangirls, or what is it?
Well, they don't know, you know, my work. They're just like, oh, strong, oh, my hero, strong, confident person. I feel safe with you. Wow. And because you know, there's that kind of New Yorker fuck you about me. That's exotic over there, and especially for women in Japan, that they find this interesting.
So it sounds like women are expected to fit into this narrow view of subservient woman. This is how a woman is meant to be.
Let me clarify that. Everyone in Japan is expected to fall into their gender and caste placement roles. Now, I want to take a moment here, because I can tell stories for hours about bars in Japan. Okay. I got a funny story. So can I run with that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I had gotten an introduction from a friend for a gathering of rope bondage enthusiasts, a community, okay? And a gathering. Ooh, sounds sort of like a munch. Okay, so I got the introduction, and I made brief contact with the organizer. So I went to go check out this rope bondage social. Now in Japan, there's being a sexuality educator is a really hard thing to explain because it doesn't exist. So I generally tend to present myself as culture writer, that they understand. So I scored this introduction, and introductions are very important in Japan. Okay? I had just been visiting my mother, bless her heart, and I mean that in a Southern way. Bless her heart. So
I heard it Southern in my head, yes.
Yeah. I was just visiting my mom. I took the train right from the suburbs of Tokyo into the sleazy center of town. And I went to this swingers bar, and this meeting was happening at a swingers bar. Mind you, all of these establishments have a cover charge or membership. So in order to engage in kink, you actually have to have disposable income. Again, this is a artifact of the Edo period structure of entertainment quarters, right? So I go into the swingers bar, and a very fashionable swingers bar, and I go up the stairs and up the stairs and up the stairs. I tell a much longer entertaining version of it in Body Storytelling, so you all check it out. So I show up, and I'm a little bit late because mother doesn't know when to stop talking. And I bow, excuse me, sorry to be late. Yeah, I'm the person that emailed. And then I go and sit down into this like sofa pit. And then and it's not a big group. And it turns out to be essentially a private group of a bunch of guys who do rope bondage together. And so it's not open. It's not like a munch at all. Okay. Again, that kind of community structure doesn't exist. So I get the introduction from the head guy, and I am introduced to Mr. So-and-so and his young, beautiful femme. And then I'm introduced to Master such and such, exquisite with rope, and his young, beautiful femme. And then I'm introduced to Master whatnot of exquisite with rope and his beautiful femme, and Mr. whatever the fuck, who is also rope bondage master. Okay? And I go, oh, nice to meet you. And it's a bar, and the guy turns out to be the manager of the bar. So he kind of snaps his finger, and I could tell like kind of the performative aspect. And then I get a drink, right? And I'm sitting there, oh yeah, sorry to be late. And then they're asking, oh, so do you enjoy rope? Do you little. Oh, so, and then they automatically, oh, okay. Do you like to give rope or receive rope? Now there is this idea that, a little segue, and I'll go right back to the room and the bar there. There's an idea in the West that in Japan, it's all cis guys who are tying cis women. And that is a sample error. That is a sampling error. And I want to point out that this particular group, I later find out, is a bunch of performers who also create imagery and porn, and they work in various degrees of sex work, right? So why is there an imagery in the West that in Japan it's male dominant, female submissive? Because I already talked about the bars where the workers are women who are topping the customers. Because the images that are created is created for the male gaze as part of product of sex industry. They're creating videos, they're creating books, they're creating photos for the consumer generally targeted towards the straight male gaze. Therefore, the person tied up is most likely going to be women, and the person doing the tying is oftentimes off screen or incredibly ordinary looking to a point of being, shall we say, homely. Why would a male lead in straight male pornography be average to homely looking?
So that people can identify with them?
Ding, 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 ding,
okay.
ding, 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 ding. Yes. Now this is different in gay male bondage imagery, where they're all hot.
But of course.
Yes, right. So the dudes tend to be blah looking. The babes tend to be woo looking. Or they're babes being tied by babes. Hot babe tying up hot babe, or average dude tying hot babe. And this is the image that gets exported. So there is this bias formed as to what's actually happening. Whereas and I have managed to get to some private rope bondage gatherings where guess what? I'm seeing all genders topping, bottoming, flipping sideways, doing all, and go and switching around at the privately organized house parties that I've gone to. There's a fluidity to who's topping and who's bottoming. And the ways that people are tying and playing and kinking is not even that formalized as the performances at the bars. But people may get an entree into it through these bars where they might meet somebody and get invited to these private house parties. And it costs a lot of money. Yeah. All right. So back to that bar.
Thank you, Spin Frog, for that.
And I'm like trying to pass myself off. I just want to sit in the corner and watch and observe and not be in the hot seat. But because it's a group of friends and I'm the outsider, they're like, and who are you? And what are you, what's your rope thing? And I'm like, oh, I dabble. And do you tie or do you get tied? I'm like, oh, I prefer to do the tying, but I'm just. And then the dude is like, oh, you must show us, what you do. I'm like, oh, I just visited my mother. I don't have rope. And he snaps his finger and the bartender shows up with this like metal briefcase, right? Metal briefcase, the kind that has drugs, guns or money in Colombia, right? And then pops it open. It's like ropes. And I'm like, okay, but I'm here alone. And then, and one of the bar workers, gal, comes over, and fortunately more age appropriate to me, somebody a little more like in their 30s as opposed to 20. I don't play with people who look 12. It makes me feel like grandma. Yeah, but and beautiful person like plops herself down next to me, like, oh dear. At which point, I have to make a decision. Do I continue lying or do I show them what I got San Francisco style?
Love that, the knuckles.
So then I'm like, oh, fuck. All right. So, and because this is a swingers club, they have these little rooms that are set up in themes. It's kind of like Disneyland's for fucking. Okay. And there was one that was like the tatami room. And then there was the other one that was like the.
Sorry, tatami. I don't know that word.
Tatami is the Japanese woven mat.
Thank you.
Right? The room
for those of us that are trying to learn more about the culture.
Yeah, woven mat. And then there's the room that looks like a studio set of a grungy basement, except because it's a Japanese nightclub, it is clean as hell. I mean, this is a grungy basement that you could eat off the floor. Okay.
So it just looks grungy.
Right, right. Oh, and by the way, love hotels, sex hotels and love hotels in Japan are so clean, and they are ever so convenient. We'll talk about love hotels in a moment. So I'm looking at that traditional looking room or grungy basement. Well, let's go for the grungy basement. Okay, let's show a little of my New Yorker roots there. Okay, so I go in there, and then the gal comes with, and I got a rope. Okay, I can either fake at being bad or do me. So I unfurled the rope and I tossed it around the gal, and I'm tossing her hither and yon, and tying her and wrapping her. And then I have a pause of a moment, and I look up, and I'm checking the ceiling points. And then I look at her, and I keep tying her, and I've tied her into this tight little human ball. Now, mind you, I mean, she's like 100 pounds soaking wet, okay? And then I take my arms onto, I grab her rope, I squat, and I deadlift her, and I curl her. I'm practically, I'm doing a clean lift and curl with her. And then I'm tossing her around, and I'm unfurling, and then she spins out. And by the way, that spinning out like a kimono being undone is a very culturally specific imagery of a disheveled, sexually undone woman, like fuck hair. So it's that undoing the obi, the belt, sash belt of a kimono, and then she falls right at my feet. And at that point, the room of the dudes are like silent. And a couple of beats later, they all kind of rush me, and they're like, oh my God, okay, never seen anything like that, dude. And you are so strong, and how'd you do that? And you are so strong, and do Americans not do like performance suspension? And you are so strong. They kept going on, that you are so strong. I mean, it was all physics and leverage. It's all in the legs, right? Because
but it also looks hella impressive. There's also that.
Yeah.
And we know you're not a show person at all. There was none of that.
And lift with your legs, right? So that was an interesting moment. That was such an interesting moment. But yeah, I had to make a decision that do I continue my charade, or do I come clean? I felt like some weird Kurosawa movie. Anyhow, now let me talk about love hotels in Japan, though. Love hotels are a fantastic institution in which they're rent by the hour places, and these are most frequented by, the majority of their customers are married people, because space is small. And you may have kids or grandparents. There may be, I mean, less and less so, but multi-generations living in a very small space. Love Hotel was something that happened, really came up in, as we know it today, in the 60s. Now, what was happening in the 60s and 70s in Japan? The economic growth and the growth of the middle class. So much of the sexual pleasure seeking has to do with the growth of the middle class and expendable income. And with living spaces being still small, married and courting couples would go and fuck off, quite literally, in these rent by the hour love hotels, which the rooms are amazing, and they're quite competitive in terms of keeping the theme fresh, because you want to retain that regulars, right? And in Japan, when I say that love hotels don't really exist here, they're shocked and going, well, what do people do? They fuck at home. And it's not so much, but it's like, oh yeah, you have the space, huh?
Oh, I see.
And you have the soundproofing, huh? So it's not so much the shock of like moral shock, but more architectural envy, space envy. But love hotels are great. And I remember on one of my trips, my boyfriend at the time was 6 foot tall, you know, which is like tall-ish in the US, but that's hella tall in Japan. He couldn't fit in the bathtub comfortably in like a regular hotel, and like the bathtub at my mom's place was like tiny, right? So the fun about going to the Love Hotel was there was this long bathtub that he could lay down in, and he could actually get a decent night's sleep on the bed because it was built for like action. Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
So I'm fascinated with you saying, Midori, that even having been born in Japan, even speaking Japanese, there's still a way. It's quite hard. Like they vet you to see if you qualify even to enter these members only spaces. And I heard you drop it in, but I'd love you to share a little more. um, you know, obviously COVID won't last forever, but it sounds like it would be really advantageous to have somebody who speaks Japanese, who can take you around, because as a Westerner, it's very unlikely, right, that we would even get access to these spaces.
Yeah. So a personal guide and introductions, and the relationships that I've cultivated in Japan with the sex workers, as well as the owners of the spaces, access to parties, invitations, is something that I've cultivated over the years. Uh, and yeah, you do need to have somebody who will vouch for you, and and it would be, I have actually done personal tours of Japan, both culturally greater Japan and doing my very anti-Midori style comparative cultural explanation, but also explanation around what's actually happening in front of your very eyes and in the sexual subculture and how to access that, and etiquettes. I end up being not a gatekeeper, but a gate opener.
Yes, so that'd be really amazing to be able to go with you.
Yeah, it's I try to keep it fun, and occasionally delightful scandals come along in places I go to. um okay, so there's some really good rope tying in Japan, but let me tell you, their whip usage sucks. Flogging is a distinctly North American skill, and single tails and flogging, of all the places that I've traveled to, Americans and Canadians are exceptional at using single tails and floggers erotically, right? And I think a lot has to do with uh, gay men in the 70s and the 80s in this craft. And so I showed California style flogging and played with somebody at a bar.
In Japan?
Yeah.
Wow. And the response?
I mean, their aim sucks. The whips that they have are awful. I mean, yeah. And for all the like culture envy that I witness here around, oh, you know, kink in Japan must be great. Kink in the US and Canada is fantastic. Over there, they're envying what's happening in the US. I explain things like RopeCraft and Dark Odyssey, and they're like, really? Now, first of all, that individuals can gather with others without, sure, you know, you pay a registration fee to go to RopeCraft, which is like ridiculously cheap, or you pay like the registration to go to Dark Odyssey, and you may have to, you know, pay your flight and all that, but it's not charged by the hour with a expensive drink minimum. Yeah, so knowing those things, but yeah, I do love private tour guiding. I can only do this for like 2, maybe 3 people, because first of all, the bars are tiny, and it would be really rude of me to take a large group with me. If the group doesn't fit into a taxi, now it's too big. right?
But it's also really, it sounds like a really bespoke experience to come with you and to, uh, what I'm observing as you share about this, Midori, is you move into a very respectful way. You even engaging with the culture. So you're not wanting to come in and be a big, not that you're like this, but a big brush American, right?
Bowl in a cultural china shop. Yeah.
Yes.
Or,
no, I love that. So somebody is asking, is there a Patreon tier for going to Japan with Midori? And while I know you have some fabulous tiers, I think this is like a one-of-a-kind experience.
so tour guiding in Japan. All right. So that is the sort of thing that in the after times, after vaccine times and after we're safe, is something that I am open to doing, but it's very individual. And yeah, I guess bespoke is the right word. I hadn't thought about it that way, because I do create like there's the culture guiding that I do, you know, go to the garden, the shopping, the food, and then there's the sleaze and the fun, you know, there's high life, low life. And I design the itinerary around individuals' interests.
I'm loving this. There are people that are like, they're already putting money in the jar for when the trip happens. But it does make a huge difference, Midori. I know the first time I went to India, I went with somebody who'd been going for 20 years, because it's similar. You can't get into some of the temples. You don't even know where they are unless somebody's showing you.
Yeah. Yes. And like yeah, there are many of these places where you got to have somebody to vouch for you. And then it's my responsibility to brief you on how to conduct yourself and to make introductions. Yeah. Let's see. What am I reading here? Cultural kimono shop. Okay. There's a kimono shop in large cities that will do kimono fitting. Oh, so somebody asked about, so tell me about the question about the kimonos. Just so you know, ordinary, everyday Japanese folks don't wear kimonos now. Now there's, yeah, that's funny. Bowl in a china shop. Yeah, bowl in a kimono shop. Or how about a bowl in a raku pottery shop? Yeah. So about the kimono. Okay. I know how to put on a kimono. My mother's very happy that I know how to wear a kimono. Most average Japanese folks don't wear a kimono. It comes and goes in a little bit of like flurry of moments of fashion. Kimono inspired contemporary fashion is gorgeous and stunning. And if you do go to somewhere like Kyoto, there's the spend the day wearing a kimono, and you can go get fitted and walk around. Now, putting on a kimono, you have to walk differently as well. I'm sure it's like that with a proper sari, right? You walk and move differently.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you have to, because of the way it moves and ties. Well, Indian women can literally carry bricks on their head at a construction site in India flawlessly in a sari. It takes a lot even to learn to tie it in India. I'm still practicing.
So what I had the pleasure of going once to India, to Bengaluru, and it was a friend's family wedding in the family of friend, and a bunch of us tagged along, right? Which was, by the way, a way by which a queer, gender fluid individual could travel back to be with family and not be pressured around marriage, was to bring a bunch of their friends with them. Anyhow, at this wedding, I ended up and I checked with the family and asked if I could wear a kimono, because wearing a kimono to a wedding is my cultural version of a formal attire. I am not going to put on a sari. It would feel really inappropriate. But I wanted to honor the wedding in the formal attire of my culture that is correct to my age and gender and station. And what was interesting was, okay, so there are all of these aunties, right, with this amazing sari and all the jewelry. And a middle-aged lady's kimono is a rather staid affair, right? But I walk in and all of these like beautiful, like peacocks and lionesses of aunties were like all over me.
I can just imagine, yes.
And then we realized that both of our garments are wrapped and tied.
Yeah.
And we had this amazing moment of like them asking me how it was wrapped and me asking them how it was wrapped. And they really appreciated me wearing the formal attire of my people to a formal event of their family. And it was neat. And then there was this whole like cultural exchange. Oh, how do you do? And this realization that the sari and the Korean hanbok and the kimono, all on the Silk Road, right?
Yes.
All of these garments that are tied and wrapped, that has certain structural commonality between all the classes. There's an upper class kimono, but there's also the fisherman's wife kimono, and they're fundamentally structurally similar, just expensive fabric and bags and in between, right? So being in this like flow of the Silk Road, and all of us women going, oh, that your culture's formal attire and my culture's formal attire, and how does this work, and how do you tuck this here, and yeah, and that was really neat, and that was very respectful in that sense of I wanted to bring my best to the table without assuming that I had the right to take from their table.
Right. So this is an example of cultural appreciation and then sharing, right? Because similar influences, but still unique in their own right.
Yeah. Now I see somebody ask, is a fisherman's kimono same as yukata? No. Kimono just means a yukata is specifically a single layered cotton summer kimono. It is as if to say a t-shirt as opposed to a shirt. So it's a subgenre of, and yukata has more to do with it's fuckle, hot and humid. So you wear one layer of cotton. Whereas with a kimono literally means the wearing thing, the thing you wear. It says, it literally translates to clothes.
I love that, because in part one, you were talking a lot about words like shibari and kinbaku. Did I pronounce both of those?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Want to try and be as honoring as I can be. But you were like, it means to tie. Like, not kinky, not, because we really, and often in the West, there's been this I can never say this word, fetishization.
You got it.
I did. Okay, thank you. Of like, oh, we must respect, like if it's Japanese shibari, it is somehow mystically better. But one of the questions I often have, Midori, is how do we as Westerners who enjoy bondage do it as an act of appreciation versus an act of appropriation?
So I would say to acknowledge that something is, acknowledge the commonness, the pedestrianness, or the underworldness. Don't elevate something beyond what it is. And once we start to elevate something beyond the scope of what it is, I don't care how nice you're trying to be, you're flattening a culture. So if if Mr. and Mrs. Yamada are getting a little butt whacking lesson in a red light district sleaze bar and learning how to tie each other up, don't elevate that into something that it isn't. Because Mr. and Mrs. Yamada are having a good time having a dirty, naughty date night. And a dirty, naughty date night should be appreciated for that. And when we start to think of all things that people do, like, ooh, everything that, Japanese sexuality is so sacred, or Indian sexuality is so sacred. We've just now flattened a whole bunch of people.
Yes.
So don't elevate it to something that is, appreciate the grittiness and the ordinariness. And I think we have a tendency to think that which is common is unremarkable, but it's only unremarkable because you're not paying attention to it. It's macaroni and cheese, okay? Mac and cheese is really tasty. But if we were to say macaroni and cheese is the pinnacle of American culinary culture.
Sorry, I find that very funny as somebody who's not American, but yes.
And, or the cheeseburger. The cheeseburger is the pinnacle of American culinary art form.
Yeah, no.
That actually disrespects by ignoring the ordinariness of it. Mm-hmm. And not everything has to be so damn precious.
Midori.
Yes, I heard a voice.
Yes. This is Bliss. We have a question. I'm wondering if I can throw the question in.
Yeah, I think it's a good time for questions. I think we just got like 10 minutes or so.
Have you seen sex culture in Japan change?
You're cutting out.
Has changed how?
How has sex culture in Japan changed?
Yes, since the adoption of the internet.
Yeah. Sexual satisfaction has plummeted, and fewer people are having non-commercial consensual sex.
That's sad. That must tip us a tear.
Yep, it is. So if the commercial aspect thrives, now here's another reason for the plummeting sexual satisfaction, general joy rate, and consensual non-transactional sex, is that the laws in Japan, labor laws in Japan, are entirely sexist. If a woman gets married, she can get fired.
Wow. Okay.
If a woman marries, then she's essentially putting her career at risk. Why marry? And then with the internet, what's happened is, and this whole effect of the post-war Japan is firstborn sons have been working their asses off to get into the right school, and they're not dating. They're not engaging in the socializing. They're not engaging in the socializing that builds interpersonal relationship, the skills of relationship communication, of courtship. Matchmakers still happen there. It's a more high-tech matchmaking, and it's the individuals, not the parents, that are driving it. But a lot of Japanese women have become entirely disillusioned with the institution of marriage and highly dissatisfied with sex. And that has to do with a combination, big old conversation around the post-war economic structure that was put into place thanks to the US occupying military and the government, as well as the internet, as well as the sexist law that has never been overturned.
You spotted the question.
Yeah, let's see. Do you see any parallels between the isolating of Japan and of America, or are they different beasts? I'm not sure I understand the isolating of Japan and of America. I would love a rephrasing on that question, and you're welcome to put your voice on if you prefer.
Anybody?
Yeah, because I'm not sure on isolating. I mean, Japan has had a 240-year history of isolation during the Tokugawa government. It is also an island nation. US has not, and US has had a fraught but diverse migration history.
Isolation in individuals is a loneliness
epidemic comparable with America. Oh, hell no. The loneliness epidemic in Japan goes way back. If you're a cinephile and if you take a look at like the movie Ikiru by Kurosawa, that'll give you a sense of it. But yeah, the isolation of the individual. Now, first of all, the individual is not a primacy concept in Japan, right? So when one faces the individual and the dissatisfaction of the individual, there's not a whole lot of other places for finding empowerment and engagement and growth of the individual. So if I could be a magical creature, what I would do is I would put antidepressants in the water supply of the entire nation of Japan.
Thank you. Here's a question. It came in anonymously. What do you think of invoking the sacred in terms of different sexual expressions when it's in a cultural context? For example, Sacred Wounds specifically celebrates East Asian ways of sexuality. Do you think it's putting on a pedestal or flattening it? So I think the idea is like cultural sacred expressions, and whether or not that is highlighting, like, you know, appreciating or flattening.
That's a complex one. From my socializing and hanging out in Japan, what I do know is there is a hunger towards wanting validation as an individual and hunger towards that emotional intimacy. The people keep going through the motions of consuming sexuality and the consuming and consuming and consuming, very hungry ghost, you know, eat, hungry, hungry, hungry. So there's a constant consuming of the entertainment world with a hole not filled, right? So I think there is a search for that. I think the awareness of the Asian diasporic experience is brought to the surface and made aware for those of us who live in a lot of intersectionality, because we have had so much to question. I think that may be something that people are hungry for in Japan and can't put a finger on it. And they keep going to the bars and the clubs. What I do see, honestly, is a whole lot of dissatisfaction and loneliness. I go over to Japan and I tell tales of the parties in the US, and they're like, oh, wow. The idea of safe word doesn't happen in Japan, by the way. It's not a norm. Yeah. Put that in your head. I don't know if I actually answered that question at all. I think I just contemplated the question. I didn't answer it.
Well, it may be bigger than even everything that we can fit in this video today, Midori, but that's great. You're a wealth of information. No, but in the best possible way. And one of the things that seems to be emerging from our conversation is for those that are really wanting to be respectful of Japanese culture and how to approach on the right way. Yes, we may have to just keep doing more videos. That's very true.
This really is a complicated question. And when I get asked the question of, you know, how do we do this in a way that is not cultural appropriation or stereotyping, it is so much of comparative cultural discussion and so much nuance of forces that aren't just how people fuck, but why, you know, why is there a love hotel? There's a love hotel because the economic situation of Japan. Why is there this economic situation? Because there was this thing called World War II. Why was there this thing called World War II? American imperialism and Japanese imperialism. And why is there a red light district? Because the Tokugawa government and their way of trying to keep control over the citizenship. And then, you know, and all of these factors. And why rope and not metal? Because that's the agrarian accessibility. And all of I didn't even talk about that part. Yeah. And then there's the laws, the antiquated laws of Japan that's informed from Victorian England that still keep women in Japan under the legal thumb. And that's causing, among other things, a rapid decline in sex, birth rate, and sexual satisfaction. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. And American imperialism, let us not forget, Japan was an occupied nation, and it still is. In Okinawa, the American government is still occupying and letting the atrocities that are happening go.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure folks know that in the chat are the ways to contact and to subscribe to Carolyn and Midori's Patreons, their information about how to reach them, some of their YouTube, access to their coaching. So just want to make sure folks had a chance to see that in case they need to drop off.
Thank you.
Yeah. Last few minutes, burning questions from out there? Because
well, Midori, I just want to finish this point saying that actually going to visit the source culture, like actually say going with you to Japan when it's safe to do that again, can be a great way. I notice when I go to India and I then sit with Indian people, there is, oh, I love all the encouragement. Thank you. I've already planned talk number 3. I just haven't told Midori yet. But going to the source culture to see it in context, like right now you're sharing with us, but from your experience. So that's a way that I try to do my best, like go and see it in reality, because reading it in a book or just hearing about it in a video is in some ways one-dimensional, right?
And, oh, you know what I'd love to share with you? You're vegan, right? Yeah.
What's that?
Right? You don't eat meat.
I don't eat meat, no.
I would love to take you to one of the Zen Temples where I usually I'll spend like, you know, a week or 10 in Tokyo, and I drink too much and I stay up too late, and you know, people still smoke over there. So I'm like, and I'll go stay at a temple just to like detox. But it's really beautiful.
What? Sorry, you broke up?
I'll go stay at a temple to, you know, like detox.
Detox.
But Japanese Zen cuisine is amazing. Now, you know, I am a sworn omnivore.
Yes.
And yeah, oh my God. And it's not like, you know, piddly wink of little bit of food. It's like tons of food. And you're not having like food faking itself to be meat. Oh, black sesame tofu with a sesame syrup, fresh fiddle fern, or like the finest tofu skin made into little noodles. Oh, so good. temple food.
I'm like, I better keep saving my mileage points so that I can come to Japan with you. It sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. So people can feel free to put their questions or comments about garlic and onion and farting in the comments section. We're going to start wrapping up the more formal part of this and then just hanging out with you guys. You get all this extra time with Midori and I if you join us live. I just put in, it didn't actually come through in the way I'd hoped, but next week I have arranged a panel. So if you click on the thing that says screenshot, I love that. Temple trip to the kinky bar trip. Yes, the full cultural Japanese experience. I love it. But yeah, next Thursday.
Both involve sake.
Even in the temple?
Shrines.
Okay, that's amazing.
Well, because Shintoism fundamentally is a boozy religion.
Oh, you see, I'm learning. I thought it was all about sticks, Midori, because that's
no. That's Zen. I do both as convenient, as like typical Japanese. Do all of it when convenient, depending on which festival. Eat all the food.
Great. Well, I'll leave all the meat for you. You're the one friend I've kept on Facebook. I think you were in Canada or something, and you were posting pictures of meat, and like that's quite hard for me.
Montreal smoked meat.
For 20 years, but I love you enough to stay Facebook friends with you. Anyway, before people drop off, I want them to know that there's going to be an amazing panel next week, December 18th at 4 p.m. Pacific, a sex positive professionals in a pandemic panel. Midori will be there, I'll be there, Reed Mahilko, Marcia Baginski, and William Winters. And please do join us for that. You'll find out more information on our Patreons as well. I believe we're going to be starting to stop the recording for the private.
So are we ready to say our official goodbye for the recording, folks?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so if you're going to stick around, stick around. But for those of you who, I'm going to stop the recording for the people who are viewing this later. Okay, so thanks for having me, and thanks everyone.
We love you, Midori, and I've loved that the participants were like, more. I'll have to catch up on some of the comments later, but yes, so much we can learn from you because you have this very unique perspective. So I love it that people are excited to learn more deeply about the cultural context.
Till next time.
Yes.